No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're using right now. On this Thoughtful Thursday, I want to talk about something that literally just came up. Lorenzo was just interviewed on the Leaders Who Care podcast, literally so recently that when you're hearing this episode, it's not even available to listen to yet. But go check them out and find the episode with Lorenzo when it eventually publishes. And one of the questions that he was asked led into a discussion around some attributes that leaders have to have. And 2 of the attributes that Lorenzo brought up in the interview were courage and decisiveness. And I thought that's a very interesting one because I love this because I've known a lot of leaders who have one or the other. I've known leaders who've had too much of one or the other, and it can be a hurtful thing. So it's whenever I hear a leadership attribute where I know it's a bell curve, where I know it's not just more is better or less is better, then I want to dive into it because I think those are the topics, those are the kind of the attributes of leaders that might tend to cause problems for more people is the ones where there's a balance, where you have to find the right level. What do you think about this?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I was really inspired from the podcast, the questions and the dialogue that we were having on the show, and Chris was asking me how it went, and he was like, what would you all talk about? And I brought up a couple of these concepts, and then he and I went into some conversation around going deeper into these and how we thought about it. So no, I'm really big on just kind of the understanding of the courage needed to be a leader and then the decisiveness. Because I looked at it from what are the things that cause the most pain points when it comes to employees and leaders, and what are the things that they like that I may have been frustrated with in the past. Well, I was like, why doesn't this leader just have the courage to to stand up for this or to push back on that type of thing? And then why can't they just make a decision? So like that's kind of where my headspace was at. But then as we were talking about it, we talked a lot about like these are sliding scales and they have a lot to do with context and in the moment and audience, and there's so many factors in these things that it sounds really good on the surface, but in application there's a lot that you have to kind of think through and talk through to make sure that it's done correctly at the right times for the right impact.
I remember having a conversation with a mentor of mine after we made a decision together to do something that we knew was going to be well received by some people, but not well received by others. But we in our hearts believed it was the right thing to do, and still to this day believe it was the right thing to do. And we talked about how if it were 5 years later, we probably wouldn't have done it because of not having the courage to do it. And it's around this idea of, sometimes we talk about it from the standpoint of naivete. Like if you're early enough in your career, what can look like courage is really naivete. Like you don't have the context of more years behind you and more relationships behind you or more to lose, right? Like there's a reason why someone can quit their job and go back to school and learn an entirely different career, when they're 26, and it's less likely to happen when someone's 46, because the gravity of the decisions and the potential for fallout if there's a failure is likely higher if you are married with kids and a mortgage than if you don't have those responsibilities yet. And so is it a lack of courage that says that they don't do that? I don't know. Yeah, sure. But is it an appropriate lack of courage? I don't know. Everybody has to decide for themselves. And the other thing is when it comes to decisiveness, I've seen leaders be incredibly decisive as they very quickly decide the wrong thing, And so just because you're decisive doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make the right decisions. And decisiveness doesn't always mean that you have to do it like in the snap of a fingers, right? A person who takes 3 minutes to make a decision that should take 3 seconds is not very decisive. But a person who makes the right decision after a few hours that would take other people weeks or months of collaboration and they just make the decision, that might be considered decisive. And so again, context matters, but the one thing that is a kind of a universal is that for a person to be a good leader, they need to be able to make a decision with the information that is available in a way that says, I'm owning this decision because I'm the leader, and I will own the fallout from it if it is the wrong decision. I'm not going to try to push that off on somebody else or mitigate the risk by trying to get other people to make the decision for me, or stand back and not make the decision because I'm not comfortable with the risk of making it. And so that's kind of what decisiveness means, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what we agree on collectively is that like not having courage is not a good thing,
Right.
And not making decisions is not a good thing,
Right.
And then kind of like anything beyond that has a lot to do with like the context and the decision and what it is. And I kind of like the walkthrough that you had around courage, because I think about that as like, courage is really like, what's the risk? Like that, like what are you risking when you make that decision? And are you aware of the risk? I think is your point about
Sure.
being, naive to it. And if you are aware of the risk, like why are you willing to take the risk? And like so, there's a lot of kind of like nuance to the idea of having courage, but we do know that leaders need courage, and that we do know that there's points in time when a leader has to step up and protect the team, or push back on something, or speak up on behalf of what the right thing to do is, and not that other people are trying to suggest the doing wrong. They just might have not a great idea, and it could be the wrong strategy at the wrong time, and that is a necessity of leadership. And then I think in decisiveness, again, it's funny because I think sometimes ego can drive our decisions,
Right.
and just then because you're decisive doesn't mean that it's the right decision to make,
Right.
and
Or that it's for the right reasons.
but it could be for the right reasons, exactly.
Right.
So like there's a lot to kind of unpack there, but I do absolutely believe that the two of those things are big factors in how teams and people perceive the leader, in how they get work done. And when done correctly, they are things that fuel people's kind of belief and confidence in the way in which the leader is kind of directing them to go.
Yeah, I love that you put it in that way, because the question I want to ask you is about the last time you had to make a decision where you knew there was risk. So it took courage to be able to make it and to kind of move forward with it. You knew there was either risk either to your career or personal safety or whatever it was, but it was so important to you to make it happen, or to make this decision, that you had to do it regardless of the fallout. You just wouldn't have been okay with not doing it. So I want to ask you that, but first I want to give it up towards one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, when was the last time you had to say something or do something that actually took courage because you weren't really certain of what the outcome was going to be, and it may have gone the wrong way?
I think there's a lot of times when I make some of those calls where I know I'm maybe risking some things, but I also feel that I have confidence in making some of these calls because of maybe like my body of work and the things that I've accomplished over time. Where like I think that most people know that when I have an opinion on something where I'm either going to be, pushing back or risking certain elements of things, that it's not coming from a place of just like complaining or trying to make noise. But it is coming from a place where like I've thought about it. I have some very specific details and a perspective, and that I'm not coming from a place of trying to cause damage. I'm coming from a place of making sure that that we are maintaining maybe the values or the the outlook on what we're trying to land with certain strategies. So I'll kind of preface it with that. Recently, there's been times where strategies I felt could have longer term negative effects on decisions that are being made. In those situations, especially when I feel that that something needs to be said, and I would have full belief that other people may have said it, and maybe that was taken into account when making this decision. But when it comes to my own personal values, when it comes to like my own feeling of personal responsibility as a leader, I still feel like I need to say something.
Right.
And again, if you listen back to the episode that we had this previous Monday, and talk about people that are like in your personal board of directors, chances are I'm going to run these feelings by some of those people that are in my personal board of directors,
Right.
and share with them what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking that, and I'm going to hear what they have to say and what do they think, and am I wrong? Is this maybe is this emotion? Is this? Is this that? And then I'm going to take that information in. And then, in a recent example, I said something and I shared my thoughts on this and why I felt that this is something that I think could cause longer term harm and damage. And again, with no expectation besides just me sharing how I felt, because I thought that was important. And I felt that like if this has been thought of and discussed, then the decision has been made. But I also feel that like I felt obliged to have to say something. So like, could that be of risk of how people perceive me? Sure. Could that be at risk of maybe somebody who doesn't have all of the context of my background and my history and who I am and where I come from? And if you just hear what I say in the moment or read something that I write in the moment without all of this kind of who I am and what I believe, it could be very risky. But I think that that's a part of leadership, though, that I wouldn't be able to feel good going home and going to bed with the potential that maybe nobody has brought this up. So, I felt that it was necessary to do.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The first thing I heard when you said that story was the old adage that we've been talking about literally for 20 years, which is results equals credibility. Right? We've been saying that for the longest time. The same exact message coming from somebody else without the long-standing history, it could be dismissed as noise or as a potential for trying to shoot things down, as opposed to, really having the experience and the history and the desire for a positive outcome to bring this up in a way that says, I'm not trying to just poop on everybody else's ideas here. I want to make sure that we're taking something else into account. And it takes somebody with a history of results to be able to say that in a way where it's most likely to land. It's the whole like right message, wrong messenger, right? Plenty of times, you might have the best parenting advice in the world, but if you don't have any children, shut up. Because you don't get to say it yet, right? Yeah. But is this the exact same thing? You might have the best organizational effectiveness advice in the world, but if you are a poor performing person with a poor performing team already, it might not be the right place for you to stand up and speak it. Maybe you pull somebody else aside and say it to them who is a high performer, and if they agree with you, they can be the one to stand up and say it. So I think it belies this importance of making sure that your house is in order, right? All the time. Make sure your house is in order, because then that keeping of your own house in order is I wouldn't say it makes you immune to it, but it is definitely a cloak of power against the naysayers who might try to shoot down what you are saying as just noise, or that you're coming from the right place. Really tough to do that to a person who has a long-standing history of performance and results. So yeah, I like that story a lot.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. I think it's important to call out that what you're talking about is credibility. You know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, if something needs to be said, anybody should be able to say it.
Right.
And if something is awry, or like shout out to Shadletsky, right? Speak up culture. People should speak up, right?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, credibility has a lot to do with that. You're much more credible when you've done the work over time, or you're doing the work right now to be able to speak up and come from a place of credibility. It's those two things matter a lot when it comes to the influence you may be able to have, or the willingness that people have to listen to what you're talking about.
So true. Or to stand up and say, if a person had the courage to speak up and say something, but they don't necessarily have the credibility to kind of stand behind it, maybe you do, but you didn't think of what they were saying, to kind of stand up yourself and say, you know what? I agree with that. Like it takes courage to agree with the person who said something that is correct, but who doesn't necessarily have the credibility to say it, because you don't necessarily want to be, lumped in with them in terms of like what people think of them. But if you can separate the good idea or the thing that was right to say from who they are, sometimes you can help things go forward because of the credibility that you bring to the table. So I think that's true too.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.